Hey there, friends. Welcome back to, I'm going to change the name and we're going to do something a little different now. It's not the questions podcast, but I'm going to do a series of videos on Christian marriage. I think Christian marriage, there needs to be some discussion about Christian marriage today, and I think a lot of people have questions about that. So I'm going to do a series of 7 videos about Christian marriage. I'm going to call this Season 3. And then I think after I'm done with this series of podcasts, I'm going to call it quits for a little while, maybe come back in the fall and do some more. But over the summer, I think I'm going to just give it a rest. So talk about Christian marriage. It's going to be the Christian Marriage Podcast, and I'm going to do 7 episodes. And this first one is just sort of an introduction to Christian marriage. So I think the first thing we need to do is, when we talk about Christian marriage, we need to define what we mean. What is a Christian marriage? Christian marriage is a union between 2 believers. So we're talking about both the man and the woman being born again disciples of Christ. If you don't have that, then you don't have a Christian marriage. Now, just allow me for a moment just to talk to the Christians who are contemplating marriage. Marriage between 2 believers is a wonderful thing, and it is an illustration of the church. That is the marriage between Christ and his bride, the church. We're going to talk about that later on. That's going to be one of the podcasts. I'm going to talk about the theology of marriage. So in these 7 podcasts, I'm going to do today the introduction, and then next time I'm going to do a podcast on premarital counseling and why it's important. And then the third video, we're going to do an episode on the covenant service versus the party. And then in the fourth video, I'm going to talk about the service elements, because some of those elements are getting lost today. And because we're focusing on a covenant service, we want the elements to be all there. And so we're going to talk about the elements of a service and some other fun stuff that, is a part of our tradition of marriage. I'm going to talk about the rehearsal and all things that can go wrong in a marriage or in a service. And then I'm going to indulge myself a little bit and do a little self-care, a little self-therapy, I guess. Talk about all the things I hate about weddings. And then the final one will be the theology of marriage. So that's going to be the rundown of all of these 7 videos. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I hope that you'll join me in each one. And if you know somebody who's contemplating marriage, send them my way. Also, if you have questions or comments that you'd like to make, just put them in the comment section. I know YouTube has a comment section. I think WordPress has a comment section. You can just put your comments there, and I'll try to, best I can, respond to each one, as long as they're pleasant. Don't send me hateful stuff, because I won't post that. I'll just tell you right now, I'm not in the business of posting hateful stuff. So if you do that, then it won't get posted. So Christian marriage. We define Christian marriage as the marriage between 2 born-again disciples of Christ, a man and a woman. Christian marriage is just between a man and a woman. And I know that's not popular today, because we're in this time when it's chic to, affirm homosexuality and transgenderism, but that is not Christian marriage. Christian marriage is between a man and a woman. It's between a born-again disciple of Christ who's a man and a born-again disciple of Christ who's a woman. That is Christian marriage. Now, if you're not a believer and your fiance, your intended, is not a believer, that's okay. Get married. If you're in love and you feel like it's a good thing for you to marry, if it would strengthen who you are, and it will, then marry. But let's not call it a Christian marriage, because it's not. Even if you have it in a church and you have a pastor do it, if you're neither one believers in Christ, then you can go through all the trappings of it, and it's just not it's a marriage, but it's not a Christian marriage. The other thing I want to say too is that if you have a fiance and your fiance, whether it's a man or a woman, is not a believer, then you're in danger. That is not a Christian marriage either. One believer in a marriage union does not a Christian marriage make. Remember what Paul said in 2 Corinthians chapter 6 when he told us not to be unequally yoked. That's King James language, but I have the Christian Standard Bible right here in front of me, and let me read it from the Christian Standard Bible. He says, "Don't become partners with those who do not believe. For what partnership is there between righteousness and lawlessness? Or what fellowship does light have with darkness? What agreement does Christ have with Belial? Or what does a believer have in common with an unbeliever?" Well, the question is rhetorical because we know that the answer is there is no agreement, there is no common light, there is no fellowship. So to say that you're going to have a Christian marriage but you're marrying an unbeliever is you're headed for trouble. There's no agreement there, and there's no commonality there. There's no basis on which your marriage will begin. So you need to begin with someone who is as you are. Now, I'm not talking about denominations. I'm just talking about you both are disciples of Christ. You're both in Christ. If you are engaged to someone who is not and has no desire to be, you need to get out of that engagement. I'm just telling you right now, for your own good, you should get out of that engagement. You won't make them better. There will be no time in the future in which they will decide suddenly that they want to become a believer. I mean, they might, but the problems that will occur before that are manifold. So you don't want to put yourself in that position. When you covenant with an unbeliever, well, first of all, they can't really covenant with you because they're not alive in Christ. So there's no vow that they can make towards you that is going to be valid. You're really harming yourself, and you're setting yourself up for hurt in the future. Don't do it. Now, I know those are strong words, but listen to me. I've been doing weddings now for almost 40 years. So I have some experience at this, and I have some experience at seeing what happens when people who are different on this issue, one's a believer, one's not, when they get married, it causes all kinds of heartache. The non-believer probably is not going to want to go to church. And what are you going to do when you have children? Are you alone going to take them to church, whether you're the man or the woman? Because you know what the children are going to ask? They're going to ask, where's mommy? Where's daddy? And if it's the father who doesn't go, then the children are going to want to stay home because the father really sets the standard in the home. And so you need to follow Paul's instruction. This is biblical, that you marry within the church, you marry another believer, and that sets the tone and the foundation for everything that happens in your marriage. What are you going to do about prayer over meals? What are you going to do about prayer with the children? What are you going to do about worshiping together? Well, there's no worshiping together if one's a believer and one's not. See, you need to put a halt to it right now and reconsider what you're about to do if you've not married yet. Another question is, and this, I haven't really heard anyone talk about this for a long time, but it's a valid question. Say that two believers do get married, you have Christian marriage, and they make vows together and they have a Christian home, but one's a Methodist and one's a Baptist, or one's a Presbyterian and one's a Lutheran, or one's a Church of Christ and one is whatever, Catholic. Well, in that case, you've got two different traditions of Christianity. What church are you going to be a part of? Are you going to go to separate churches? Are you going to have separate experiences? And how will you raise the children? What church will they be a part of? Or is one of you going to say, come over to the other one's point of view, and say you're a Methodist and you marry a Baptist, and you decide, well, I'll go to the Baptist church, just for the sake of peace in the home. Shalom bayit. You want peace in the home. So you do that. Well, that's okay, but you need to consider that as well. And that needs to be something that you talk about before you marry. You don't wait until after you marry to discuss your religious opinions about things like that. That needs to be decided early. It needs to be agreed upon early, long before you take the vow. Because you never know, it may be an issue not just for the individual, but for their family. And so you need to discover that before it becomes a problem. So that's just sort of the introduction to this whole subject that I wanted to give you today. Next time we'll talk about premarital counseling. And I want to encourage premarital counseling. I want to talk about the 5 things that become a problem in any marriage that with premarital counseling you can circumvent, or at least give yourself the tools to help later on in your marriage when those things crop up. And they will, I promise they will. So I hope this helped. Check out 2 Corinthians chapter 6 and the other passages about marriage in the New Testament. I didn't speak about that today, but I will when we talk about the theology of marriage. And I hope that you'll come back to the Christian Marriage Podcast next time as we talk about premarital counseling. God bless you guys. I'll see you soon. Bye.